Hello, everyone, and welcome to A New Direction. My name is Jay Izzo, and oh, wow, do we have a great show. No, we have a creative show for you today. Matter of fact, we're gonna be so creative. We're gonna get right to the core of your creativity. I tell you what, today's book, it's called Core Creativity: The Mindful Way to Unlock Your Creative Self, written by Dr. Ronald Alexander. It really is an eye-opening, makes you dig deep. And the thing about this book is this. The thing that I told him was, we're going to talk about, the four-part person, but he weaves the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual all into creativity. Because the truth of the matter is, if we're not healthy, we're not creative. And matter of fact, what Dr. Ron's going to talk about is, you know what? Hey, listen, if you're not taking care of your body, you're actually inhibiting your creativity. If you're not taking care of your mental health, if you're not taking care of your emotional health, if you're not tapping into yourself spiritually, you are not taking advantage of all your creativity. He is going to be outstanding. You're going to love him. I promise that. But before we get to him, let's do what we do every week, right? And that is I walk you through the 4 areas of your life. Look, we're 4-part people. We're physical, mental, emotional, spiritual people. And if you've never joined us before, and by the way, thank you for joining us here live everywhere out. I could see people live watching us right now. Thanks for joining us here live. And for those on TV, right, on DBTV who watch us, millions of people from all over the world, thank you for joining us here as well. But what we do here is we walk you through the 4 areas of your life, and we have you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being this area is not going so well. 10, this area couldn't be any better, okay? So, by the way, don't worry about whatever number you are. So if you say that you're a 2, right? I don't want you to go, oh my gosh, I'm only a 2. No. It's a starting place where we could go to say, okay, what can I do right now to get from a 2 to a 2.5? All right. So first area, let's take an example, physical. If you were to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, 5 being average, how would you say you're doing when it comes to exercise, eating right, drinking enough water, getting enough sleep? What kind of grade would you, maybe going to the doctor regularly for checkups? How would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? 5 being average. Right? Whatever that number is, it is. But then that should be a number to say, okay, what can I do to change to get just a little bit further? All right. So that's your first number. Your second number is your mental intellectual number, right? Listen, you can't be on the couch absorbing information and thinking that somehow you're going to have massive growth. The fact of the matter is you need to be an active participant in your learning, and you should be learning every day. By the way, it doesn't matter how old you are. Dr. Ron's going to point this out. You could be learning every day. That's the one thing that we have available to us is we can learn every single day, every moment of every day. So how would you evaluate, right, your learning? And by the way, that entails two halves of your brain, right? There's the creative side, the right-hand side, the left-hand side is the logical side. How well are you doing integrating both halves of your brain into your learning? So on a scale of 1 to 10, what number would you give yourself there? The third piece is the emotional piece, right? And Dr. Daniel Goleman has done extensive work on emotional quotients and emotional intelligence, but the way we break it up is really simple in 2 ways. 1, how well are you able to control your emotions under stress and pressure, right? And then the second is, how well are you able to tap into and understand the emotions of others? They're both equally important. Right? We have control of both of those things, right? Impulse control. We have control of those things, right? And the first one is how do you control yourself? The second is how are you able to just sit and listen and understand? So what number would you give yourself there? And then the fourth number is the spiritual number. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with the spiritual side of ourselves. But the truth of the matter is we're all spiritual. You remove the physical, the mental, the emotional. We have some element of us that has a heart of something that is spiritual, that goes beyond ourselves. There is the spirit of the person within us, right? But then what brings you back to center? What brings you back to peace in the midst of chaos? What brings you back, gives you a sense of joy, even when life isn't so joyous? I mean, is it God? Is it meditation? Is it yoga? Is it nature? Is it something else? And then the question is that working for you? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you evaluate your spiritual self? Those 4 areas are like the air in the tires of your car. If one of the tires in your car is low, the car tends to veer. It doesn't work efficiently. It doesn't work effectively. If all four tires are low, well, you start to put a lot of pressure on the car to try to roll and roll right. And it actually can ruin the car over the course of time. So what we want to do is we want to have the air in our tires all filled up to the right height so that what we're doing is we're rolling along as smoothly as we possibly can. And speaking of someone who does that extremely well, his name is Dr. Ron Alexander. He is a mind-body psychotherapist, an international trainer, and creativity, business, and leadership coach. He has private psychotherapy and executive coaching practice in Santa Monica, California. He's the executive director of the Open Mind Training Program, which offers personal and professional training programs in mindfulness-based therapies, transformational leadership, and meditation. He's also the author of the highly acclaimed book, Wise Mind, Open Mind, Finding Purpose and Meaning in Times of Crisis, Loss, and Change. He's also the author of his latest work, Core Creativity, The Mindful Way to Unlock Your Creative Self. And you can learn more by going to corecreativity.com. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show and welcome to the first time ever to A New Direction, Dr. Ron Alexander. Welcome, Dr. Ron.
Hey, Jay, great to be here.
Awesome. Well, listen, I love the book. Let's just dig right into it. One of the things that you come right out and say to us in chapter 1, which is entitled The Deepest Creativity Comes from Your Core, you said that some statistics, I just want to throw these out first. It said LinkedIn analysis of their data showed that the number one soft skill employees are looking for is creativity. And then you followed that with a recent survey of employers by the American Management Association showed that 75% felt that creativity was a key skill that employees needed. Why are we so short on creativity?
Well, because of the culture, when we're small children, where Joseph Chilton Pearce wrote a wonderful book called The Magical Child. And as children, we have a natural spontaneity and curiosity and sense of wonder. But as soon as I started, for example, I went to the first grade in Boston. And when I started to tell my first grade teacher, Mrs. White, about my imagination and that I had an imaginary friend, and I also would like to see things when I would close my eyes, she would say things like, oh, no, that's not real. And so it's embedded oftentimes in the culture where we're either educated away, or if we have parents that don't really understand the wonder and the mystery of the creative imagination, and they poo-poo it, and they don't give more support to it. In the early 70s, I was a young intern at both the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center in Baltimore and at the Maimonides Dream Lab in Brooklyn. And there was a young girl named Tammy Simon. And her mother brought her in so that we could study her because she was very psychic. And one of the things that we discovered from working with the mother and the daughter is that the mother gave total permission to the daughter's psychic and intuitive abilities. And so when you have a nurturing surround that supports your creativity, your imagination, and your intuition, it's like your imagination becomes a flower that continuously gets watered and fertilized.
You talk about myths, and you want to talk about the truth about creative processes and people who embrace their creativity. Some people will say that when they look at creative people, and I'm one of them, that we don't seem to be doing anything, that we just seem to be kind of in our own la la land. That's kind of a myth, though. We don't just sit there, even though we aren't working on something like, people want us to be working with our hands or something like that. But that's kind of a myth. Just because we're not necessarily engaged in something that you would think would be creative, we're still being creative, aren't we?
Yes. The unconscious is alive and active 24/7, 365. Especially even when we go to sleep at night, our creativity doesn't turn off. What actually comes online is our imagination, and we start to dream. And we are the writers, the producers, the directors, the actors, we're even the objects in the dream that have animate or inanimate formations. And so creativity is something, especially when we think we're not doing something. In Zen, we say that the empty mind then becomes the fertile mind of opportunity. And then the great Zen teacher, one of my Zen teachers, Suzuki Roshi from the San Francisco Zen Center and at the Tassajara Zen Mountain Center I studied for 25 years, he says in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. And so in emptiness or in quietness, when we think we're not doing anything, our creative imagination is actually alive and vibrant, and it's coming online.
Yes. It's so true. It's so true. And I know it frustrates, it can frustrate people when we're engaged in something else and we don't seem to be engaged in the thing that they want us engaged in, that actually our creative minds are working all the time. It doesn't just turn off. We're downloading information and we're trying to put things together. Okay, that's one myth. I love that one. Here's another myth that many people have heard, that creatives are depressed, mentally unstable, or both. What do you say?
Well, in the early, in mid 70s and the early 80s, I had the unique opportunity to start the Center for Health and Healing at the Cedars-Sinai Medical Office Towers in West Hollywood. And at first, when I was teaching classes on meditation and yoga, in addition to my private psychotherapy practice, the girlfriends and the wives would come in for the daytime and the evening yoga classes and mindfulness meditation classes. And after a couple of months, they started sending their boyfriends, their husbands, who were in the music, film, television industry. And many of them, at that time in history, they were bipolar. And so some of them actually believed, because there was this zeitgeist myth, that if we took away your depression and or your mania with either medication or meditation, that you wouldn't be able to be creative. And there was many a musician and many a screenwriter and film director that would really clutch and hold on and say, oh, no, I don't want to learn to meditate, or I don't want to go on any kind of medication to treat my depression, because I'm afraid that I will lose my creative edge. Over time, and I read about this in my book, Core Creativity, over time, those that continued to work with me, and they were open and receptive to learning how to meditate, to learn how to do yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or guided imagery. At that time in history, I also was doing a lot of music therapy. And over time, the more comfortable that they got by letting go of the concept or the idea that it was depression was what gave them the fertileness to create. What we began to see in my clinic was that when there was an evenness, that creatives started to become more prolific. And so, for example, I had several conversations. I was introduced to him through the Zen meditation community. He was never a client of mine. The late, great poet, singer, songwriter Leonard Cohen. And I was at many private function with him, some parties. And I once asked him, I said, Leonard, there's this aura of depression that surrounds you, that you yourself even speak about when you're interviewed. And many people have this myth that it's the depression that causes you to be so prolific in poetry, in your lyrics, and in your song arrangements. Is that true? And Leonard, who was a man of not a lot of words, got very quiet and very still. And he said, "Oh no. Depression was the ocean that I swam in," meaning context. "But when I came out of the sea and I was on the beach," meaning evenness and brightness, "that's when I was most creative." So this myth that you need either your mania, which is what we call an enthusiastic, overactive upsurge in your nervous system to be creative, or the opposite polarity, that you have to come way, way down and really go into the blues and really, really suffer. Most of the musicians I've worked with in the last 5 decades actually will say that it's the even place, and it's the place where they get really quiet and they're not drugging themselves out, and they're not trying to capture that rocket of mania, that's when they really be able to slow down and to listen inwardly for the creativity to unfold. So what I do in my work and what I write about in the book is it's really important to embrace that the fertile void comes from becoming user-friendly with your creative unconscious. And in order to become user-friendly, it's paradoxical. Instead of speeding everything up like in a manic mode, it's the very opposite. The slower the pace, the more enlivened and the more formulated upsurge that comes from what I call exuberance or passionate enthusiasm, is that leads to really being creative. And it's important to think about. Oak trees are fantastically creative because they grow hundreds of feet in the air and they spread all out. But they grow best because they're rooted down, and their root system is oftentimes twice the size of the actual main trunk of the tree. So if you think about getting grounded, being rooted, having what I call a spiritual practice or a spiritual background, gives you a backbone to embrace your creativity and to really utilize it. I tell an anecdote in the book where I was seeing this young screenwriter for about 6 months, and he told me that he goes to Starbucks every day, and he writes pages and pages of free-flowing creative thoughts. And so I asked him to bring it all in, and he had like boxes of just endless notes. And he was suffering with hypomania. And then over time, when I got him into practicing mindfulness meditation, is all that what he thought was prolific stream of consciousness writing, it all quieted down. And he was able to go back to his coffee shop with his notebook, and he would move into a mode of bullet points, more clarity, more lucidity. And then from the bullet points, over time, we helped him to craft his first screenplay treatment, and which he then sold. And then it's history now. He has, one renowned screenplay after another that's being made either in a television series or a major motion picture. So being grounded, going slow, accepting and opening that the quietness in the stillness is very, very fertile. That the void is not black. The void is not something to be your enemy or to be frightened or scared of. It's actually something to be welcomed and to be understood, that the void is a fertile void, not an empty void.
That's great. His name is Dr. Ron Alexander. The book, Core Creativity, The Mindful Way to Unlock Your Creative Self. You're listening to him here on A New Direction. Hey, folks, Epic Physical Therapy, my physical therapist, I think they should be yours too. Whether you're recovering from injury or surgery or suffering everyday aches and pains, whether you're a professional athlete or just an everyday person just like me. Look, when you're looking for your epic relief, your epic recovery, your epic results, don't look any further. Go to epicpt.com. That's EPICPT.com. And Linda Craft Team Realtors, for more than 38 years, they've been helping people with their life transition. And you say, wait. I thought they were a real estate company. Yeah, but think about it this way. Wherever you have moved, wherever you have lived, there has been a life transition. And they have, for over 38 years, been helping people with that life transition. They would love to help you. So whether you're selling a home to your next life transition or whether you're buying a home for your next life transition, talk to the experts at Linda Craft and Team Realtors. That's lindacraft.com. That's LINDACRAFT.com. And we're back here on A New Direction with Dr. Ronald Alexander and Core Creativity, the mindful way to unlock your creative self. I want to do one more myth before we move on that I'd love to have you talk about, Dr. Ron, and that is that there's a myth that subscribes that as we age, we lose our creativity. And what's your response to that?
Well, a fellow named Dean Simonton, also in the late 70s and the early 80s, he's a research psychologist at UC Davis, University of California, Davis. He wrote a book on creativity. And one of the things that he found in his research, which was similar to me in my research back then, was that there used to be a scientific belief that there's a part of your brain that's responsible for the production of new neurons, and it's called the mid-insula. And mid-insula works in cooperation and coordination with your prefrontal cortex, particularly the right prefrontal cortex, which is more creative and imaginative. And his research, as well as mine, showed that contrary, that the old scientific view was that after about the age of 50, the amount of neurons in the mid-insula began to decrease. And that's why, like in my family, when my grandfather, Michael Mooney, was aging, he was put in the corner of the living room in his chair, and nobody ever really interacted with him. He just kind of sat there and smoked his pipe. What we found is that if you utilize spiritual practices and or brain-mind exercises like luminosity, mindfulness meditation, crossword puzzles, getting on the computer, learning to play tennis or racquetball, learning to ski in the 50s, 60s, 70s. The more things that you do that challenge the brain, that instead of the brain cells decreasing, what's called a gray mass in the right prefrontal cortex in the mid-insula, that over time, that when you stimulate the brain with new learnings that you bring online, you actually bring on, interestingly enough, billions of new neurons, because the brain is composed of billions of neurons. And so that as some are dying out, when you're taking time, 20 minutes twice a day to practice mindfulness meditation or to do some creative writing or to learn something new, that you're stimulating the production of new neurons. And so one of the things that we found, both Dean Simonton found back in the late 70s and early 80s, and I found through the last 5 decades of working with creatives, is that as you age, many creatives become actually more prolific over the age of 50, rather than that their creativity dies out. Now, the one place that is very, very contradictory and paradoxical, and that's in the music industry. And why, we don't know. But if you take, for example, someone like Bob Dylan, by the time he was 30, he had written close to 360 songs. And many of those songs, even up to today, are viewed as masterpieces. And I recently saw him in an interview on 60 Minutes. And the interviewer asked him, did he think that he could continue to write at this age in the same manner that he wrote when he was in his 20s? And Dylan was very quiet, very still, and he goes, no. And the interviewer said, well, why not? And he said, well, because there's a kind of a magic that occurs when you're in your 20s and you're young. And so musicians tend to have very prolific bodies of work, primarily in their youth. But then again, Dylan has like over 50 albums. Neil Young continues, and he's well into his 70s, continues to be prolific. And I could cite many, many other musicians that don't quite fit the mold that all the creativity occurs primarily in your 20s. That they break that mold, which then again supports my thesis that we're all capable of continuing to grow and to learn and to create up until the very end of our lives. And when people ask me, well, how do you have a more resilient or more engaged or passionate life? I turn the mirror back to them and I say, activate your creativity, mind down into your creative unconscious, and become enthusiastic and passionate. And that will open up new pathways that will enliven you and create an overall sense of resiliency and well-being for you.
How does mindsets, you talk about growth mindset, you talk about open mindsets, you talk about inward versus outward mindset, you talk about prevention versus promotion mindset. How do mindsets affect our creativity?
Well, mindsets are very, very important because in the theory of Gestalt therapy, which Gestalt therapy means awareness and oneness between mind and body and spirit. And the belief in Gestalt therapy comes from field theory, that an organism is always in dynamic relationship between itself and the environmental field, that there's this dynamic engagement. You can't have a fish that lives in a pond by itself. Mm-hmm. That you have to have the dynamism of interactivity and what we call in Buddhism codependent origination, the interconnectedness of all parts of the universe and all parts of the self interacting with the universe. And so if you embrace field theory, a fixed mindset is like imagining that you've got a koi pond and the only thing that's in it is koi, but there's no bacteria and there's no other fish and there's no mosquitoes and there's nothing fertilizing it. A fixed mindset means that the organismic field of thought, feeling, and creativity is very narrow and constricted. A growth mindset is the very opposite of that. It means that when the organism self interacts with its environment, it becomes vibrant, enlivened, passionate. It's always opening, even though there's always a component in creative output of where we have these huge creative periods, creative outbursts, but then there's a kind of a contracting back somewhat. But in an open mindset, already what we call a growth mindset, if the self organism is always challenging itself to learn new things, to discover, to spend time being quiet, to be thoughtful, to trust that when you get quiet, you allow the emergent hungering creativity that's within all of us to filter and float up from the bottom of the lake or the ocean, as a metaphor, unconscious, and float up to the surface so that then you can capture and ride the waves of creativity that are always seeking and hungering for you to surf. And so in a growth-oriented mindset, we're always leaning into the future. Bruce Springsteen was interviewed in Rolling Stone about 7 years ago. And the interviewer said, "What is rock and roll?" And Springsteen said, "Rock and roll is an energy, a creative energy that's pulling its audience towards the future. It's pulling its audience." And so in a growth-oriented mindset, we're opening in the moment and we're envisioning to the creation of a new future. And all creativity is really envisioning that of which has yet to occur. It's becoming an opening, a place where you harness the stillness.
You talk about here, and I'm going to use a quote from chapter 2. It says, often people underestimate the impact of loss on them, particularly their mood and their creativity. Talk about the impact of loss and creativity, because I think this is a really important inhibitor for so many people when it comes to their creative abilities, is because they're not dealing with the loss. Because you talk about saying hello, say goodbye before you say hello.
Yes. Well, loss is part of the formula of the fertile void. And I'll give a case example. A couple of decades ago, this couple came to see me, and they had lost 4 of their children in a very tragic fire one evening. And I was working with them, and they had been working with another therapist, and they were really, really stuck. And so I said, well, why don't we just sit down on the floor, and we're going to practice mindfulness meditation. And I explained to them what it was. And we're going to just see what emerges, and each person will go around and share. And so at one point, I saw the map of India. And this was a very lovely couple of some religious persuasion that had nothing to do with Asian thought or yoga practice or meditation. And I shared that, and the wife started to also see that she and her husband were envisioning being on a boat going down the Ganges River. Now, the husband, from the night of the tragedy, he hadn't spoken in almost a year. He had literally become almost mute because he was so overwhelmed with grief and loss. And when I shared that image of India, and she saw them riding down the boat of the Ganges River together, he started crying. And then after about 20 or 30 minutes of us just sitting in stillness, they both opened up their eyes and they said, "We got it. We're going to go to India." And so fortunately, I was able to reach out and make some contacts so that they could spend some time in Calcutta with a humanitarian. And they were only going to go for a month, and they ended up spending 6 months. And when they came back from India, they said to me that they had visited the sacred city at that time. It was called Benares, but now it's been renamed to its original name, Varanasi. And that each and every day they meditated at this ashram close to the banks of the river Ganges. And they saw that, well, there was all these crematoriums that are right on the banks of the river. And they saw small children being cremated, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 80s, etc. And it gave them a map, an inner map, to begin to start harvesting of, well, what were they going to do with the next chapter of their life? And so they came back, and I asked the wife, well, what do you want to do with the next 10 years of your life? And she said, I want to go to medical school. And it was something she said, I've never, ever considered that as a thought before India. And I turned to him, I said, and what would you like to do? And he said, well, I'm going to continue to do he was in the lighting business, both interior lighting and then industrial lighting for the entertainment industry. He said, I'm going to utilize my business as a way of bringing awareness and spiritual teachings to everybody that I interact with each and every day going forward, because I've learned so much over the loss of our 4 children. So from loss, there's gain. From shame, that can become fame. From death, there's rebirth. And so that we embrace in creativity thinking that there are cycles and there are seasons to creativity. In fall, we plant seeds creatively. In winter, we hibernate and we deepen. Springtime, when sun comes out, the seedlings that we planted come up under the ground. And then between spring and summer, there's an outflowing of the beautiful flower or of the crops that you've planted. So there's a harvesting. So loss is an important part. Loss is akin to the winter. The winter, some writers and creators I've spoken to often call it the winter of discontent. It's when they feel empty and devoid. But they trust that by waiting, fertility will fill that feeling of emptiness or that voidness.
That's awesome. I'm going to jump ahead here to chapter 7, which is entitled Mindsets and Habits of Highly Creative People. And one of the first things that you say is be solutions oriented as you create a vision for yourself. What do you mean be solutions oriented as you create a vision for yourself?
What's most important in creating a vision is not spending time focusing on what hasn't worked or what's broken, either in your life or in the project that you're trying to forward. What's most important in a creative mindset is focusing on the solution, which is the polar opposite to the problem. So, for example, if you think of the phrasing, well, we have a breakdown right now and we're all stuck in the team. What I often do when I interact with corporations and teams is I'll say, so let's utilize the breakdown in order to create an opening for a creative breakthrough. And in mind-body healing therapy, when we're working in psychotherapy, we're working with symptoms of degenerative disease or illness or immune disorders like cancer, is how can you learn from the breakdown? How can you learn from the diseased state to move towards the state of easiness or ease? So we want to have a focus that within every breakdown, there are pieces to pick up, but the importance is to create the future, which is diametrically opposite from staying in and trying to continuously mine for why it broke down and what's the reason that it didn't go forward. That jams you up and also constricts you. But if you open up the mindset to the future is always yet to be envisioned. And almost all of the great creatives that I've studied all had a tremendous and wonderful respect for envisioning into the future. I read a story once that Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, his wife wrote that he had a habit of in the afternoons dozing off. And people often thought he was just napping. But when he was interviewed, he said, "Oh, no. I'm spending time looking from within and seeing what's emerging from within." And whether it's Ray Kroc, who actually in one of those little cat naps, he saw an arches. And he had no idea. This was long before he invented his franchise. And Walt Disney, you had journals of sketches of all the characters that we've come to know and love, Mickey Mouse and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And I was working in the early 80s, and this is also connected to loss, as I was brought into the Walt Disney Company, to their department. It's called, the division is WED, Walt Elias Disney, Creative Imagineering. And I was asked to interview many of the directors, producers, and writers and design specialists of Epcot in Florida. And many of them were reporting that with the ending of all of their involvement with Epcot Disney Florida, that they were feeling very depressed, very down. And so what we did was we spent a lot of time paying attention to how to utilize those feelings of loss and to transform them into the future. What were they going to create now? Since Epcot was Walt Disney's last noted vision for the company. So it's really important to use loss, like in alchemy we call creative mud. In many of my trips to India, I would always ask to go to the flower ponds, because the most beautiful flower in all of India is the white lotus. And what does it grow in? A mud pond. And that's a wonderful metaphor for not only our experiences of loss in our life, but it's also, mud is a mulch. It's a creative fertilizer. In real earth time, but it's also in alchemical and shamanic time. It's a transitioner. From mud gives birth to the beautiful lotus flower. So our past and or our present give birth to the invention of a new future. The key is having that open and that creative mindset to always be out in front of yourself, leading yourself from whatever the past has been, whether it's a painful past, whether it's been fraught with failure. I also teach that when you spend less time focusing on how you have failed and embracing that you can learn from your failures, there are winning formulas for success.
I'm going to stop you right there real quick as we take this commercial break, because we're going to come back to this, because this is really important, seeing failures and setbacks as offering opportunities. So hold on to that thought, Dr. Ron. We're going to come right back. You're watching Dr. Ron and myself, his book, Core Creativity, The Mindful Way to Unlock Your Creative Self, listening to him here on A New Direction. Folks, listen, Epic Physical Therapy, here's the deal when it comes to them. They have the most top-of-the-line advanced equipment, including the Ultra-G anti-gravity treadmill, the Normatec compression sleeves, Game Ready, which you know is my favorite. They're also trained and certified in most comprehensive cutting-edge treatments, such as blood flow restriction therapy, dry needling, cupping. That's just a few. Look, when you're ready for your epic relief, your epic recovery, your epic results, don't look any further. Start with epicpt.com. That's EPICPT.com. And Linda Craft Team Realtors for more than 38 years. They have been serving the world, helping them transition in life. The truth of the matter is, every place you've ever lived has been a life transition. listen, they've successfully helped people take the stress out of that transition and making it as smoothly as possible for thousands of people. Why don't you understand why? Just go to lindacraft.com. It's LINDACRAFT.com. And we're back here on A New Direction with my friend, Dr. Ron Alexander. Hopefully you're enjoying this, Dr. Alexander. I hope you're having some fun with this a little bit.
It's delightful, Jay. It's great. I love you're fabulous as an interviewer.
Well, so speaking of that, thank you for saying that. But speaking,
you're seeding my consciousness.
Well, you seed mine too, because as a psychological professional, I am so interested in this area. And then I have taken, I've looked through this, and I'm always looking for more ideas to be more creative, because I know that you can never stand still, that you have to keep moving forward, and you have to, I need new things, because you talk about, you have to do some research and observe, right? And so every time I bring an author like you on the show, it's research and it's observation, and you're listening and you're trying to glean something out of that that says to me, oh, am I doing that? Am I not doing that? And, and this leads us to, seeing failures and setbacks as offering opportunities. Where did I not do well? I don't see that as being, okay, I failed. No. It's just a chance for improvement. So talk about that, because that's how I see it. So talk about failures and setbacks as offering opportunity.
Yeah.
And why the ego gets involved here.
Yes. Yeah. But how I know that you're creative is just in listening to your language. You said, I'm always looking for new opportunities. And I'm always not standing still. And so those are two earmarks of a creative. You're somebody who is in active mode, always looking. See, when we stop looking, that's when we're not creative. We look into the future. We look into the present. Rumi, the poet, said, through meditation, you will learn the ability to look inside and to discover that the doorway to both the heart and the creative self opens inwardly. The doorway is inside. Yeah. And you're a guy that's not standing still.
No. And I believe in what you said. I love what you said here. I believe in mistakes. Yes. I so believe in that.
I've been on set many a time, and one of the things, and in the recording studio, and one of the things that you discover is directors don't say that was a mistake. They say that was a mistake. Let's take it again, and let's take it again, and let's take it again. And in the recording studio, it's the same thing. Okay, that was terrific and great, but let's try it with a little bit more bass and softer on the drums. See, another take. See, creatives are always hungering and thirsting for the next take rather than focusing on the mistake.
Yes. The other thing that you talk about is taking a risk rather than staying in your lane. I am so noted for this. Because I have no background in, my master's and my doctoral work was in psychology. And so I don't have any background in doing this, but I studied like crazy Larry King and Johnny Carson. And so I wanted to do a show because like you, I've written books and I wanted to do a show that I wanted to be on. And some people would say, well, you've never had any broadcast experience. And I'm like going, well, heck with that. I want to get out of my lane. Let's take a risk and see what happens. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. And again, in your own languaging, you wanted to do a show that you yourself would want to be on and you'd want to listen to. That's getting out of your lane. See, instead of accepting that, well, maybe your slot in life was to just be a psychologist.
Right.
That's a fixed mindset.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was
What?
Aldous Huxley, the great novelist, oftentimes would say, and he would counsel some of the younger human potential peers in Los Angeles and California. And he'd say, you can be anybody you want. You can create any religion that you want. You can create any form of yourself that you want, with meaning that you, if you accept that your source, your cause in the matter, you are the central core of creativity. Because when you open inwardly, you not only open up to what's inside of your personal unconscious, but Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who invented Jungian psychology, which was a huge departure from Freudianism, so that we have a personal unconscious, a collective unconscious, and a racial unconscious, meaning that we have the capacity that we can tap into something that an Aborigine in the outback of Australia, we can dream about something that he or she is doing in the outback, and vice versa. Why do Aborigines have dreams that have crucifixes in them, having never been out of the outback, never having seen a crucifix? Because there's this core, this collective, infinite field of infinite possibility and potentialities, which I call the creative field of opportunity. And so staying open is a key ingredient to that.
Yeah.
That was another piece of your question. What was it? Did we cover the mistake?
Yeah, we covered mistake. It was you're looking at failures and setbacks as opportunities. Yeah.
To move forward. And
Right.
so even a set back is an opportunity to reset forward rather than to stay fixed looking back.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's really good. How does perseverance and we got just a few minutes left. How does perseverance and patience play a role in our creativity?
Very, very important virtues. Again, in Zen, the theory of enlightenment or self-transformation, the formula or the slogan is, if you want to become fully awake and fully creative, it's not the faster that you go that will lead to an awakened consciousness. The slower you go, what the Zen master wants to do is to slow the student down. And through the process of slowing down the frames, that opens up the quiet. And in the stillness is when we deepen into the fertility and the creativity. So patience is really a virtue. And that's why I teach mindfulness meditation, because for someone like myself, I was a very hyperactive student. I had tons of energy, and the teachers were always trying to corral me and control me. And then I got to this one music teacher in high school, and she used to say to me, go into the room and play any instrument that you want for as long as you want, and then go and play another instrument, which was a way of saying, let's ride the horse of all that energy you have, Alexander, into the future. We're going to get on that horse. We're not going to try to put a bridle in its mouth. We're going to harness it. And you're free. She was giving me a great Zen formula. You're free to stay with whatever you want to stay with and then let it go. Patience, though, comes further down the road, is after we find things that we feel really impassioned about, we have to cultivate patience, perseverance. As Bob Dylan said, yeah, I wrote those 360 songs, but I had a lot of discipline. And anyone who ever knew him would say the same. Very disciplined writer. And all the greats and the creatives, very, very disciplined. And in the book, I write about daily rituals. And interestingly enough, 75% of the people that I interviewed and asked them the question of what are your daily rituals, 75% of them all woke up at 6 o'clock and did some form of either a walk or a meditation or a yoga practice. And they all had either a cup of coffee or some tea, chai tea, and sat quietly, whether they were doing a formal meditation practice or they were just like sitting there. Ronnie Landfield, who is a prolific transpersonal spiritual painter from New York City. Now he's in upstate New York, and I interviewed him for the book. He said he sits out in front of his studio, which is like a big barn in upstate New York, and he'll sit there with his coffee, and he'll look sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours outside at the blue sky, and he'll just wait. And it was also well known that Jackson Pollock, his wife, wrote that he would sit sometimes for days, weeks, and even months in front of a huge, completely blank canvas. And people thought, he was a little nutty. No, that was his genius. He was actually envisioning and seeing the painting hour by hour coming in. Yeah. And then he'd go to work and do it. So patience, perseverance, and fortitude.
Awesome. We've done our hour, Dr. Alexander. You've been fabulous.
Thank you, Jay. You've been great too.
Tell people how they can get a hold of you.
www.ronaldalexander.com or corecreativity.com.
Awesome. I'm going to put that on the blog post that is associated with the show so that people can get a hold of Dr. Ronald Alexander. And also keep in mind that the book is available there and also Amazon and bookstores everywhere. Stay with me, Dr. Ronald. Hey, folks, this is the show. You know what I say to you every week, right? You are in control of three things: your attitude, your effort, and your resilience. You can get back up again. It's your choice. I know that circumstances can be difficult at times, but you know what the truth is? You still have control of your attitude. You still have control of your effort, and you have control of getting back up again. Take control of those things because you can. I'll be back next week with another great guest. It's going to be another great book. That means it's going to be another great show. As I say to you all over the world, thank you so much. You had a lot of choices. You chose us. I appreciate you. And ciao, everybody.